A man's entire career can be made or broken in a single moment. For Marcus Thorne, a lawyer so sharp he could cut glass, that moment was coming. He was on the verge of winning the biggest case of his life, a case that would make him partner. The only thing standing in his way was the gavel of one man, the unshakable, notoriously ethical judge, Arthur Vance. But as Marcus stood in a crowded ballroom, he turned his razor-sharp cruelty on the one person he thought didn't matter, his quiet, unassuming wife, Elara. He grabbed her arm and hissed, not knowing that the judge he was trying to impress was the one man in the world he should never, ever have crossed. Marcus Thorne lived his life by a simple creed. Power was everything. And in the gleaming steel and glass towers of the city, power meant winning. At 34, he was the sharpest associate at the prestigious law firm of Sterling, Croft and Finch. He was the firm's chosen gladiator, and his arena was the courtroom. His current battle, the Kensington Holdings class action lawsuit. It was a beast of a case, one that had chewed up 2 senior associates before him. Kensington, a development Goliath, was accused of using substandard materials in a dozen high-rise condominiums, leading to structural failures and a litany of tenant complaints. Marcus's job wasn't to prove they were innocent. It was to make the problem disappear. It required a surgical blend of intimidation, procedural mastery, and leveraging every loophole in the civil code. And he was brilliant at it. He lived in a penthouse apartment that was as cold and perfect as his ambition. Everything was chrome white leather and glass. It was a home designed to be photographed, not lived in. And in this perfect, sterile box lived his wife, Elara Thorne. To Marcus, Elara was comfortable. She was the soft, muted background to his sharp, high-definition life. He'd met her 4 years ago at a fundraiser. She was quiet, sketched in a notebook, and seemed utterly unimpressed by his talk of billable hours and case law. He found that intriguing. She told him she worked in art, and her family was in government, which he'd translated to mean struggling artist and DMV-level bureaucracy. He saw her as a gentle, simple creature, a pretty low-maintenance accessory who managed his home, organized his dry cleaning, and asked for nothing. He was, in a word, dismissive. "Elara, what is this?" He'd snap, holding up a new painting she'd hung in the hall, a swirl of turbulent blues and golds. "I finished it last night. I thought it brought some warmth." "It looks messy. It looks amateurish, Elara. Clients come here. It makes us look soft. Take it down." He wouldn't even look at her face as he said it, already scrolling through emails on his phone. He treated her work at the local art co-op as a child's hobby. "It's sweet you have something to keep you busy while I'm closing the Kensington deal, honey," he'd say, patting her on the head. But the Kensington deal was hitting a snag. A big one. The case had been assigned to the one judge in the entire state Marcus couldn't read bully or charm, the Honorable Judge Arthur Vance. Vance was a legal legend, a man famously immune to political pressure and corporate influence. They called him the Iron Gavel. He was known for his piercing gaze and his obsession with a single abstract concept character. He'd been known to rule on procedural motions based on his perception of a lawyer's integrity. To Marcus, this was a terrifying variable he couldn't control. "The man is a ghost," Marcus vented to his rival and fellow associate, Julian Croft, in the firm's private lounge. "He has no political donations, no golf club membership. How am I supposed to get a read on him?" Julian, a man who favored tailored suits and a more methodical, ethical approach to law, sipped his scotch. "Maybe try the truth, Marcus. I hear he appreciates that." Marcus scoffed. "The truth is a scalpel, Julian. You don't just hand it to the patient. You use it to cut out what you don't want." His strategy hinged on an upcoming event, the annual Bar Association Gala at the St. Regis Hotel. Judge Vance was the keynote speaker. It was Marcus's one chance to get in the same room to make an impression, to show he was the kind of man Vance would respect. "Elara," he called out, walking into their apartment that Tuesday. The scent of turpentine and linseed oil hit him, and he winced. She was in the spare room, her studio, her hands covered in paint. "Hi, Marcus. How was—" "You need a dress," he interrupted, loosening his tie. "The bar gala is on Friday. It's black tie, and not one of your handmade bohemian things. Go to Saks. Get something designer. Something simple, elegant, grey or navy. Don't try to make a statement. The last thing I need is you drawing the wrong kind of attention." Elara wiped her hands on a rag, her quiet expression unreadable. "The bar gala. That sounds important. It's not sounds, Elara. It is—" He snapped the stress of the case, making his voice sharp. "This is about the partnership. It's about our future. Everything is riding on this Kensington case, and Judge Vance will be there. I need to be perfect, which means you need to be perfect. Can you handle that? Just blend in. Smile, look pretty, and don't talk about art." She just nodded, turning back to her canvas. "Grey or navy?" "I understand, Marcus." He walked away, satisfied. He had the case, the plan, and the wife all under his control. The world was exactly as he'd built it. The St. Regis ballroom was a sea of power. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting a warm golden light on the city's most formidable legal minds. Senators mingled with partners. Rivals clinked champagne glasses and shared false smiles. This was Marcus's element. He was electric, moving through the crowd with a predator's grace, his hand possessively on the small of Elara's back. She had followed his instructions perfectly. She wore a simple, elegant navy silk gown. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore only a simple pearl necklace. She was as he'd requested, an unobtrusive shadow. "Marcus, brilliant move on that motion to dismiss," said Arthur Sterling, the firm's senior partner, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "You've got Kensington Holdings breathing easier." "We're not there yet, Arthur," Marcus replied, his voice a perfect blend of confidence and humility. "It all comes down to Vance. I'm hoping to get a moment with him tonight." "He's over by the dais," Sterling noted. "But he's difficult. Good luck. And Mrs. Thorne," he said, turning to Elara with a polite smile. "A pleasure. That's a lovely gown." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Elara said, her voice soft but clear. As Sterling moved on, Marcus leaned in his fingers, digging into Elara's arm. "See, that's how it's done. Just stay quiet. I need to go work the room. Don't wander off." He left her by a towering floral arrangement, and Elara watched him go. She saw the man she'd married, but she also saw a stranger, a man so desperate for approval he was willing to crush anything that didn't serve his immediate purpose. A quiet, deep-seated sadness settled on her. She'd spent 4 years believing the ambitious man was just one part of him, that the kind, curious man she'd met was still in there. Tonight she wasn't so sure. She felt a presence beside her. It was Julian Croft, Marcus's internal rival. "Elara." Julian said, his smile genuine. He wasn't looking at her as an accessory. He was looking at her. "I'm glad you came. I was hoping to see you." "Julian, it's good to see you too. I finally went to the Midtown Arts Collective last week, like you suggested," he said, ignoring the legal chatter around them. "That new exhibit, the one with the reclaimed metal sculptures, it was astonishing. Your curation was brilliant. The way you used the light in that warehouse space, it was inspired." Elara's face lit up a genuine, dazzling smile that Marcus hadn't seen in months. "You went, I'm so glad. Didn't you find the piece by Maria Sanchez just Heartbreaking. The one with the welded chains. Absolutely. It's amazing what you've done with that place, Alara. You've turned it into a real cultural hub. From across the room, Marcus watched them. He saw his wife animated talking with his rival. A hot, ugly spike of jealousy and irritation shot through him. Julian was everything he wasn't, patient, cerebral, and Marcus suspected more respected by the firm's old guard. And now he was distracting Alara, pulling her from her designated spot. He started to move toward them, his face a thundercloud, when the keynote speaker was announced. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our keynote speaker, Judge Arthur Vance." The room erupted in applause. Marcus aborted his path to Alara and rushed to his table, which was to his delight near the front. He needed to be seen. Judge Vance took the podium. He was exactly as advertised, tall, silver-haired, with eyes that seemed to see everything. He commanded the room not with volume, but with an intense, quiet gravity. "We are guardians of the law," Vance began, his voice resonating through the microphone. "But the law is not just a collection of statutes. It is a living, breathing covenant of character, a man's true nature." He said, his eyes scanning the room, "is not revealed in the light under oath. It is revealed in the shadows. It is seen in how he treats those he believes have no power, how he acts when he thinks no one important is watching." Marcus was captivated, hanging on every word, nodding at the judge's profound wisdom. "This is my guy," Marcus thought. "He respects strength. He respects character. I just have to show him I have it." After the speech, as dessert was served, Marcus saw his chance. Judge Vance was momentarily alone, accepting a glass of water from a waiter. This was it. "Alara now," he hissed, grabbing her hand and pulling her from her chair. "Come with me. I'll introduce you. Just smile and nod." He dragged her through the tables, his nerves making his grip painfully tight. As they approached the dais, a waiter carrying a heavy tray of coffee and desserts was bumped by another guest. The waiter stumbled, and the tray tilted. Alara, walking slightly behind Marcus, saw it happening. She tried to step back, but Marcus was pulling her forward. The waiter corrected, but a single cup of hot black coffee flew from the tray, arcing directly onto the front of Marcus's pristine white tuxedo shirt. A collective gasp went up from the tables nearby. Time stopped. Marcus looked down at the dark, spreading stain. The heat was just beginning to seep through to his skin. All his planning, his perfect suit, his perfect moment ruined. And it was ruined in front of everyone. In front of Vance. He turned his face, a mask of incandescent rage. He didn't see the waiter. He didn't see the crowd. He only saw Alara, who was standing there, mortified. "You!" He seethed. He didn't shout. He did something far worse. He grabbed her arm, the same one he'd been holding, and yanked her hard into a small, curtained alcove just off the main floor. The music and chatter of the gala muffled his voice, but not his fury. "Are you trying to ruin me?" He spat his voice, a low, venomous vibration. His face was inches from hers. "You clumsy, useless. You couldn't do one thing, one simple thing. Just stand there and not be a complete and utter embarrassment." "Marcus, it was an accident," Alara whispered, trying to pull her arm free. His grip was like a vice. "The waiter! I don't care about the waiter," he snarled. "I care about me. I care about my partnership. You with your paint-stained fingers and your vacant-eyed staring. You just cost me everything. Why did I even bring you? You're nothing. You are a liability." Alara's eyes filled with tears, a mix of pain and shock. "Marcus, you're hurting me." "Good," he hissed. "Now you know how I feel." He shoved her arm away from him in disgust. Get out of my sight. Go to the bathroom, fix your face. I'll deal with this mess you made." He turned to step back into the ballroom, adjusting his stained jacket, his mind already spinning on damage control. As he pushed aside the heavy velvet curtain, he almost collided with a man standing right outside the alcove, a man who had clearly heard every single word. It was Judge Arthur Vance. He wasn't looking at Marcus. He was looking past him into the alcove at Elara, who was clutching her arm, tears streaming down her pale face. The judge's expression was unreadable, a cold, hard mask of granite. But then it softened into something Marcus had never seen. It was a look of pure paternal concern. "Elara." Judge Vance said, his powerful voice suddenly gentle. "Are you all right?" Marcus's blood turned to ice. His brain struggled to connect the dots. "Elara." Why was the judge? Elara stepped out from behind the curtain, her tears stopping. Her face, which had been full of fear, now hardened with a cold, devastating resolve. She looked at her husband. She looked at the judge. And then she did the one thing Marcus Thorne could never have predicted. "I'm fine, Dad," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "I'm fine now." The world didn't just stop for Marcus. It inverted. The music from the ballroom, the clinking of glasses, the hum of 100 conversations, it all receded into a deafening, high-pitched whine. "Dad." The word echoed in the cavern of his skull. "Dad. Dad. Dad." He looked at Judge Arthur Vance, the iron gavel, the man who held his entire future in his hands, the man whose keynote speech on character was still ringing in his ears. He looked at his wife, Elara, his quiet, simple, art-obsessed wife. The liability, Elara Thorne, Elara Vance, Judge Arthur Vance. The pieces of the puzzle which he had been too arrogant to even see now slammed together with the force of a physical blow. Her family was in government. Her desire for privacy, her utter lack of interest in his world of power and influence, she hadn't needed it. She'd been born with it. "Dad!" Marcus stammered, his voice a pathetic croak. He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin cold and clammy. Judge Vance's gaze shifted from his daughter to Marcus. The paternal softness vanished, replaced by a look of such profound glacial contempt that Marcus felt his knees weaken. The judge didn't say a word. He didn't need to. In that single silent moment, he judged Marcus Thorne, and the verdict was guilty. Elara stepped forward past Marcus, as if he were a piece of furniture. She walked directly to her father. "I'm sorry, Arthur," she said, calling him by his first name, as she often did in private. "I didn't want to ruin your evening. You have ruined nothing, Elara." Judge Vance said, his voice low and steady, yet carrying absolute authority. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, the one Marcus hadn't grabbed. His eyes flicked to the red marks forming on her other arm. Judge." "Sir," Marcus sputtered, taking a step forward. He tried to manufacture a smile, a laugh, anything. This is a misunderstanding, a terrible family spat. You know how it is. The stress of the gala." Judge Vance held up a hand. It was a simple, short gesture, but it stopped Marcus mid-sentence, as effectively as a gag. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion, "do not speak." The gravity of the moment was pulling in onlookers. Julian Croft, who had been watching Elara with concern since Marcus dragged her away, was now approaching. Arthur Sterling, the senior partner, was right behind him, his face a mask of confusion. "Judge Vance, a pleasure to finally meet you," Sterling said, extending a hand, trying to inject normalcy into the tense tableau. "And I see you've met our rising star, Marcus Thorne, and his lovely wife, Elara." Judge Vance did not take Sterling's hand. He kept his eyes locked on Marcus. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice cutting through the air, "I have known Elara since the day she was born. She is my daughter." Arthur Sterling's professional smile froze and shattered. His eyes widened first at the judge, then at Elara, then at Marcus. He saw the coffee stain. He saw the red marks on Elara's arm. He saw the venom still clinging to Marcus's face and the cold fury on the judge's. And like Marcus, he understood everything. "Oh," Sterling said. It was a small, empty sound. Julian Croft stepped past the frozen partners and stood beside Elara. "Elara, are you okay? I saw him grab you." "I'm fine, Julian." "Thank you," she said, giving him a small, grateful smile. The casual first-name basis between his rival, his wife, and the most powerful judge in the state was another knife in Marcus's gut. They knew. Julian knew. How many people knew? He realized the truth. He wasn't the center of the universe. He wasn't even a bit player. He was the court jester, the only one who didn't know the king and princess were related. Elara. Marcus tried again, his tone shifting to one of desperate, pleading intimacy. "Honey, please, let's go home. We can talk about this. I was stressed. The case. I didn't mean it." Elara turned to him. The tears were gone. Her eyes, which he had always mistaken for vacant, were as sharp and clear as her father's. They were the eyes of a judge. "No, Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with finality. "We've talked enough. You said everything you needed to say in that alcove. You told me I was nothing. You told me I was a liability." "I was angry. I was just talking." "No," she said, shaking her head. "That was the first time in 4 years you were completely honest. You finally told me what you really think of me." She turned her back to him, a gesture more definitive than any slap. "Dad," she said to the judge, "I'd like to go home." "Of course, my dear." Judge Vance put his arm around her shoulder. He then looked at Arthur Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, your firm is on my docket, Monday morning, the Kensington case, 9 a.m. Sterling, white as a sheet, just nodded. "Judge." "Mr. Croft," the judge said, nodding to Julian. "It was a pleasure to see you at the collective. Your donation was very generous." "My honor, Judge." "Elara," Julian said softly. "Take care." Judge Vance and Elara turned and walked away. They didn't storm off. They just left. They moved through the opulent ballroom, a father protecting his daughter, parting the crowd of legal royalty. And every single person saw them go. They saw the judge, they saw the quiet woman he was protecting, and they saw Marcus Thorne standing alone in the doorway, covered in coffee and shame. Marcus was left behind, standing between his apoplectic senior partner and his stunned rival. The music swelled. The party tried to resume, but a cancer had been cut open. Arthur Sterling turned to Marcus. His face was no longer confused. It was rigid with a fury that rivaled the judge's. "My office, Monday, 7 a.m. Sterling whispered, his voice shaking. "And God help you, Marcus, because I don't think anyone else can." The drive back to the penthouse was a 20-minute descent into hell. Marcus had fled the gala enduring 100 pairs of eyes that either stared with pity, curiosity, or open disgust. He'd barked at the valet peeled out of the St. Regis driveway and was now gripping the steering wheel of his black Mercedes so tightly his knuckles were white. Elara, who had arrived with her father, had insisted on going back to the apartment alone to get her things. Her father had wanted to send his driver, but she'd been firm. "I'm not scared of him, Dad. Not anymore. I just need to get my bag." So she'd taken a cab which had arrived just minutes before Marcus. He slammed the apartment door, the sound echoing in the cavernous, sterile living room. She was in the bedroom pulling a suitcase from the walk-in closet. "Elara!" He yelled, his voice a raw wound. The shock had worn off, replaced by a desperate, panicked rage. "You have to fix this." She didn't look at him. She calmly placed a few stacks of clothes into the bag. "Fix what, Marcus?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. "This, all of it. You have to go to him. You have to tell him I was stressed, that I'm a good man, that I love you. You have to tell him to recuse himself, or just to forget it. It was a fight. Couples fight." She zipped a side pocket and finally turned to look at him. "Tell him you love me," she repeated, as if the words were in a foreign language. "Did you love me 10 minutes ago, Marcus, in the alcove, when you told me I was nothing? I was angry," he roared, slamming his palm on the dresser. "The Kensington case, my partnership, my life, was on the line, and you humiliated me." "No," she said, her voice slicing through his tirade. "You humiliated me, and you humiliated yourself. You think that coffee stain is what ruined your night? You think that's what my father saw?" She walked past him into her studio. The room he hated, the room that smelled of turpentine. She began carefully placing a few small framed sketches into a portfolio. "He saw you grab my arm," she continued, her back to him. "He heard you call me useless. He heard you say I was an embarrassment. He heard you, Marcus. He heard the real you, the one I've been living with for 2 years. That's not the real me," he pleaded, following her. He was desperate now, grabbing at straws. "The real me is the one who closes deals, the one who wins, the one who provides this penthouse. This cage," she corrected him. She turned, holding a small, unframed painting of a bird, escaping a series of black geometric bars, the one he'd told her to take down. "You think I married you for this? I grew up in a house that could buy this building, Marcus. I never cared about the money. I never cared about the penthouse or the car or the designer clothes you made me buy." "Then what did you want?" he yelled, his frustration boiling over. "If you were Elara Vance all this time, why marry me? Why hide it? You tricked me. You set me up." Elara let out a short, bitter laugh. "Tricked you. Set you up, Marcus. I didn't hide who I was. I just didn't advertise it. When we met, I told you my father's name was Arthur Vance. I told you he was a judge. You were so busy talking about yourself you never even registered the name. You just assumed he was some small-time municipal judge. You assumed I was small-time." She stepped closer, her eyes boring into his. "I hid it, Marcus, because I was looking for one person. Just one. Someone who would see me. Elara, the painter, the quiet woman who likes old books. I wanted someone who would love me, not my father's name. I thought for a little while that was you." "It is me," he insisted. "No," she said, her voice breaking for the first time, not with sadness, but with a lifetime of disappointment. "It's not. The man I met was curious and charming, but the man I married, he became this, controlling, dismissive, cruel. You didn't just dismiss my art, Marcus. You dismissed me every day. You told me my opinions were simplistic. You told me my work was a hobby. You systematically tried to sand away every part of me that wasn't your perfect, quiet wife." She picked up her suitcase from the bedroom and walked to the front door. "The gala. That wasn't the first time you've yelled at me like that, was it?" she asked softly. "It was just the first time someone else heard. Someone you think is important." He had no answer. He could only remember the times he'd thrown a brief on the floor because she'd interrupted his train of thought, or the way he'd berated her for 20 minutes because she'd been 5 minutes late picking him up. "Where are you going?" he whispered, the panic rising again. "To his house, Ilara, wait. Don't leave me. Not tonight. Not before Monday. My career." She stopped at the door, her hand on the cold chrome handle. "That's all it's ever been about, isn't it? Your career. Your partnership. Your future." She looked at him one last time, with a devastating, clinical pity. "You know my father taught me that character is what you do when the stakes are high and no one is watching. But you, Marcus, you're the opposite. You're only good when someone important is looking. The rest of the time, you're just the man in the alcove. Ilara, please. Goodbye, Marcus." She opened the door. "Oh," she added as a final thought. "My father won't be recusing himself from the Kensington case. He's too ethical for that. He won't let his personal feelings interfere with his judgment." A tiny, insane sliver of hope flared in Marcus's chest. So I still have a chance." Ilara looked at him. "He won't have to. I suspect Mr. Sterling will handle it for him." She closed the door behind her. The click of the deadbolt locking was the loudest sound Marcus had ever heard. He was alone in the sterile silence, the smell of her paint and his failure hanging in the air. Monday morning at 6:45 a.m., Marcus Thorne walked into the lobby of Sterling Croft and Finch. The vast marble-floored expanse, usually a symbol of his power and ambition, felt like a funeral home. The night security guard, who usually gave him a cheerful, working hard Mr. Thorne, just looked down at his desk and pretended to be busy. The news had travelled at the speed of light. The texts and missed calls from other associates and even partners had been a relentless barrage all weekend. Some were curious, some were gleeful, but most were just silent. He was already a ghost. He took the silent elevator to the 50th floor. The doors opened onto a hushed, mahogany-panelled reception area. Arthur Sterling's executive assistant, a woman named Miss Davenport, who had been with him for 30 years, was already at her desk. "He's waiting," she said, her voice cold. She didn't offer him coffee. Marcus straightened his tie, a funereal black one, and pushed open the heavy oak doors to Sterling's corner office. The room was dark, the blinds still drawn against the rising sun. Arthur Sterling was sitting at his massive desk, not in his usual suit, but in a shirt and tie, looking as if he hadn't slept. Julian Croft was already there, standing by the window holding a folder. "Sit down, Marcus," Sterling said. It wasn't a request. Marcus sat in the leather chair opposite the desk. It felt like a long, long way from the man behind it. "I have spent the last 36 hours. Sterling began his voice, a low, controlled rumble, on the phone. First with our partners, second with the board of Kensington Holdings, and third with the ethics committee of the Bar Association. Marcus's blood ran cold. "The bar. Oh, yes," Sterling said, steepling his fingers. "It seems your behavior in the alcove was not just witnessed by Judge Vance. His personal clerk, Mr. Harrison, was standing not 10 feet away. He filed a report, not a legal one, but a memorandum of concern with the bar. He categorized your aggressive and demeaning conduct toward your wife as a potential violation of the character and fitness clause." That's insane. It was a private matter." Marcus protested, his voice rising. "Was it Marcus?" Sterling slammed his hand on the desk, making Marcus jump. "Was it private when you did it in a ballroom filled with every prominent lawyer and politician in this city? Was it private when you publicly humiliated the daughter of the presiding judge on your most important case? He can't rule against me because of this. He doesn't have to," Sterling roared. "You've already lost. Kensington Holdings is pulling their account. They are uncomfortable being represented by counsel who has shown such catastrophic lack of judgment." Those were their exact words. "They are retaining new counsel, effective immediately." Marcus felt the floor drop out. The case was gone. The case is the least of your problems," Sterling continued, his voice dropping back to that icy rumble. "This firm's name is Sterling, Croft and Finch, my name, Julian's grandfather's name. It is a name that has stood for integrity for 70 years. In one night you have associated that name with spousal abuse, arrogance, and profound stupidity. Arthur, I can fix this. I can apologize. I can make a statement. You will do no such thing." Sterling cut him off. "You are suspended effective immediately pending a full partnership review, but I wouldn't hold your breath. As of this moment, you are to hand over all your case files, your building access card, and your company credit cards to Ms. Davenport." Julian Croft stepped forward and placed the folder on the desk. "These are the transfer memos for your active files, Marcus. I'll be taking over Kensington until we transition it to the new firm." The ultimate humiliation. His rival, his polar opposite, was inheriting his kingdom. "You," Marcus looked at Julian, his eyes wild. "You knew, didn't you? You knew who she was." Julian looked at him, not with triumph, but with a weary disappointment. "I knew Elara was Judge Vance's daughter, yes. We've served on the board of the Arts Collective for 2 years. I've been to her parents' house for dinner, and you never told me." "Why would I?" Julian asked, genuinely puzzled. "It was her business. She's a private person. I respected that. Frankly, Marcus, I just assumed you knew. I thought your constant dismissal of her and her work was just a bizarre, cruel part of your marriage. I didn't realize you were also a complete fool." The words hit Marcus harder than any of Sterling's yelling. "A fool." "Get out, Marcus," Sterling said, turning to his computer. "You're done here." Marcus stood up, his legs shaking. He was the golden boy. He was the shark. And in 10 minutes, he'd been reduced to nothing. He walked to the door, a dead man walking. "And Marcus," Sterling said, not looking up. Marcus stopped his hand on the doorknob. "I just got off the phone with Robert Finch, my partner, who happens to be on the board of your penthouse. Your lease application, which was up for co-op board review next month, has been denied. You have 30 days to vacate." Marcus didn't say a word. He just opened the door and walked out into the bright, busy, indifferent morning, a man with no job, no wife, and no home. 3 weeks later, Marcus was living in a corporate stay hotel in a part of town he used to fly over. The penthouse was a sterile box on the 10th floor with a view of a parking garage. The carpets were beige, the art was generic, and it smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. He'd spent the first week in a blind rage calling partners, leaving furious voicemails and trying to get Elara to answer his calls. He'd been met with a wall of silence. His calls went to voicemail. His texts went undelivered. She had blocked him. The second week was spent in a pit of self-pity, drinking expensive scotch he could no longer afford, and replaying the night at the St. Regis over and over in his mind. If only the waiter hadn't stumbled. If only Vance hadn't been standing there. If only Elara hadn't been so clumsy. Now in the third week, a cold, hard reality was setting in. He was a pariah. No firm would touch him. The Harrison Memorandum had made the rounds. He was the guy who yelled at a judge's daughter. He was toxic. He'd been forced to hire a cut-rate lawyer just to negotiate his severance from Sterling, Croft and Finch. They were giving him 2 months' pay and a gag order, which he'd been forced to sign. Today he was back at the apartment. His apartment. The one he'd been so proud of. Elara had arranged for movers to get her things, her clothes, her art, her books. She had, through her lawyer, given him 24 hours to remove any personal effects he wanted, before the bank seized the contents to pay for the broken lease. He walked through the vast, empty rooms. The white leather sofas were gone. The glass tables were gone. The bed was gone. The only things left were his clothes, his collection of law trophies, and the one painting she'd hung in the hall. The messy one with the turbulent blues and golds. He stood in front of it. He saw it properly for the first time. It wasn't messy. It was powerful. It was a storm. And in the center, there was a single small point of calm, bright light. He reached out and touched the canvas, feeling the thick, dried paint under his fingertips. This was her. This was the woman he'd called simple. I didn't see, he whispered to the empty room. He walked into her studio. He'd only been in here a handful of times, always to complain about the smell. Now it was just a white, empty room. But on the floor in the corner was a single, forgotten sketchbook. His heart hammered. He knew he shouldn't. It was an invasion of privacy. But what did he have left to lose? He picked it up. He flipped through the pages. It wasn't just sketches of trees and landscapes. It was filled with him. There were sketches of him from their first year when they were dating. He was smiling, his head tilted, his eyes bright. She had captured a version of him he'd forgotten existed. Then the sketches changed. There was one of him on his phone, his back to her, his shoulders hunched and angry. Another of him at the dining table, his face hidden behind a stack of legal briefs drawn as a fortress. And then the last page. It must have been from a few weeks ago. It was a sketch of his face, but it was split in two. One half was the charming, smiling man she'd met. The other half was a monster, a contorted mask of rage, teeth, bared eyes empty. Underneath it she had written one word, "Whichor." Marcus sank to the floor, the sketchbook in his lap. It wasn't a setup. It wasn't a trap. It was a test. She hadn't been a passive victim. She had been an observer, a judge. She had been watching him, waiting for him, hoping for the man on the left side of the drawing to win. And at the gala in that alcove, the man on the right had won. He had given his final verdict on himself. He'd spent his entire life trying to impress people of power. He'd been living with the daughter of the most powerful man he'd ever meet, and he'd treated her like nothing. He hadn't just miscalculated. He had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of power. He thought it was about shouting and winning and control. He'd been wrong. Real power was quiet. Real power was Ilara's paintbrush. It was her father's silence. It was the ability to see the world as it was, and to walk away from what was broken. He sat on the floor of the empty room, the drawing of the monster staring back at him. And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Thorne wept. 6 months passed. The city in its relentless march had forgotten the small, sharp implosion of Marcus Thorne. Winter had come, scoured the streets with ice, and was now giving way to a muddy, tentative spring. The world had moved on, and the players in that grand ballroom tragedy had all found their new places in it. The legal world which Marcus had believed revolved around him had recalibrated in an afternoon. The Kensington Holdings class action, once his golden ticket, had been swiftly and quietly handed to Julian Croft. But Julian had not played by the Marcus Thorne rule-book. He hadn't intimidated. He hadn't drowned the opposition in procedural motions. Instead, he'd done something novel. He'd listened. Julian had arranged a meeting, not in a boardroom, but in the damp, cracked community centre of the very building in question. He'd brought Arthur Sterling and the entire Kensington board, and he'd brought Ilara. Ilara, in turn, had brought her artists. She had commissioned a photo documentary exhibit. For an hour, the executives were forced to look at 10-foot-tall, high-resolution photographs of the black mold spreading in a child's bedroom, the spiderweb of cracks in a foundation wall, the face of the elderly tenant, Mrs. Petrova, who had been without heat for 3 weeks. Julian hadn't argued case law. He'd simply pointed to the art and said, "This is your legacy. Fix it." Wary of Judge Vance's continued unblinking scrutiny, and perhaps for the first time, genuinely ashamed, Kensington Holdings caved. They settled for an amount that was triple what Marcus had been trying to whittle them down to. It included full structural remediation for all 12 buildings, and a public apology. Julian Croft, the quiet cerebral lawyer who believed in the truth, was made junior partner at Sterling, Croft and Finch. His star, lit by integrity, was burning brightly. Judge Arthur Vance continued to preside a pillar of granite in the shifting sands of the city's legal system. He was, as always, the iron gavel. But those in the know, those who had seen him at the gala, noted he was quicker to see through bluster, and his gaze was even more piercing when he detected an attorney bullying a witness or a junior associate. He had seen the monster up close, and he would not suffer its presence in his courtroom. Miles away, in the small, unremarkable town of Millfield, Marcus Thorne was learning to live with his own reflection. His life in the city had been vaporized. The penthouse, the Mercedes, the $800 suits, all gone liquidated to pay the catastrophic penalty for breaking his lease and the mountain of credit card debt he'd accrued to maintain an image. He was now living in a second-floor walk-up apartment above a bakery. The smell of yeast and sugar woke him at 5 a.m. every morning. His office was a small, dusty room on Main Street, shared with a real estate agent and an insurance broker. The gold-plated Marcus Thorne Escadist sign was gone, replaced by a simple vinyl sticker on the frosted glass. He was no longer a gladiator. He was a small-town mechanic. He handled DUIs, simple wills, and messy neighbor disputes. His clients weren't titans of industry. They were people like Mr. Henderson, a farmer fighting an easement, or Sarah Gable, a single mother whose son had been caught shoplifting. They came to him not for his shark-like aggression, but because he was the only lawyer in town who took payments in installments. He sat in his office, the fluorescent lights humming, listening to Sarah Gable cry. "He's a good boy, Mr. Thorne." She wept into a tissue. He fell in with the wrong kids. They said if he just... Oh, God. The old Marcus would have cut her off. He would have been calculating plea bargains, bullying the DA, and checking his watch. But the new Marcus just sat. He listened. He saw the panic in her eyes, a fear that was not about stock prices, but about a child's future. I can't pay you much," she whispered, ashamed. "Let's just focus on your son first, Sarah," he heard himself say. The words felt foreign in his mouth. They were not strategic. They were kind. After she left, he sat in the silence. He was for the first time doing work for people who needed help, not for corporations that needed protection. It was quiet, it was humbling, and it was an agonizing daily penance. That evening he walked back to his small apartment. It was sparsely furnished with second-hand items, save for one object. Hanging on the main wall, illuminated by a single lamp, was Ilara's painting. The messy swirl of turbulent blues and golds. He had found it left behind in the penthouse, the only thing the movers hadn't taken. He'd packed it himself, his hands shaking. He stood before it now, as he did every night, a glass of cheap whiskey in his hand. He finally saw what she had been painting. It was a storm of rage, ambition, and chaos. But he also saw what he'd missed before. In the very center, almost invisible, was a single small, impossibly calm point of bright white light. He'd spent his life being the storm. He'd never even looked for the light. He thought of the sketchbook, the monster, which she had asked. He finally had the answer. He had become the monster. And now he was this. Nothing. An empty man in an empty room, haunted by a piece of art he'd once called amateurish. He touched the rough canvas, the paint thick and dry under his fingers. It was the only truth he had left. On that same spring evening, 200 miles away, the Midtown Arts Collective was throwing its grand reopening. It was no longer a hobby or a co-op. It was the city's newest, most vibrant cultural institution, having just secured a massive endowment. The warehouse space was unrecognizable. It was packed not with stiff lawyers in tuxedos, but with artists, musicians, writers, and patrons. The light was bright, the music was loud, and the energy was electric. On a small stage, bathed in a warm spotlight, stood Ilara Vance. She was not the quiet grey accessory Marcus had demanded. She wore a vibrant red dress, her hair was down, and her eyes, those same sharp eyes as her father's, scanned the crowd with a new, unshakable confidence. She was luminous. "Good evening," her voice, once a whisper, rang out, clear and strong. "They say that art is a luxury, that it's a hobby, something messy to do in your spare time." In the back of the room, Julian Croft smiled, standing next to Judge Vance. "I'm here to tell you that art is not a luxury. It is a necessity," Ilara continued. "It is messy. It's supposed to be, because our lives are messy. Our truths are messy. Art is the one thing that doesn't lie. It's the mirror that shows us who we really are. It shows us our shadows, and it shows us our light." The crowd erupted in applause. Ilara locked eyes with her father. He wasn't the iron gavel. He was just Dad. He was beaming a pride so pure and bright it was almost blinding. He raised his glass to her in a simple, profound salute. Later, Julian found her by the Maria Sanchez sculpture. "That was a magnificent speech, Ilara," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "Thank you for coming, Julian, and thank you for what you did, for the Kensington tenants. It was the only thing to do," he said simply. "You showed me the path. Those photos, they were more powerful than any legal brief I could have written. You gave those people a voice. It was a clear-cut case of character. Theirs and, well, Kensington's." They stood in a comfortable, respectful silence. The noise of the party swirled around them, a happy, vibrant storm. Have you heard from him?" Julian asked, his voice low. Ilara's smile didn't falter, but her eyes held a flicker of ancient history, a wound long since scarred over. "My lawyer finalized the divorce last month," she said, looking at the sculpture, not at him. "He's somewhere, working. I received a single certified check in the mail last week. It was for the painting, the one he always hated. He paid me what he thought it was worth. Far too much." She paused. I hope he finds what he's looking for. I hope he finds a way to live with himself." "And you?" Julian asked. "Have you?" Ilara turned to him, her smile returning genuine and full. She looked around the room at the art that was her soul, at the people she had brought together, at the life she had built. Not a life she had hidden from, but a life she had forged for herself in the full, honest light. "Yes," she said. "I think I finally have." Marcus Thorne locked his small office. The clock on the town hall steeple struck 9. He walked down the creaking wooden stairs, the smell of tomorrow's baking bread from the bakery below filling the air. He stepped onto the quiet, empty street. He caught his reflection in the dark bakery window. He didn't see the shark. He didn't see the rising star. He saw a tired man in a rumpled suit that was slightly too large for him, a man with lines around his eyes that weren't from smiling. He thought of the gala, the alcove, The coffee stain. He had been so wrong, so profoundly, catastrophically wrong. He'd spent his entire life trying to impress people of power, trying to perform character. He realized far too late that he had been living with true power. The quiet power of Ilara's paintbrush, the silent power of her father's integrity. He had mistaken her quietness for weakness and her privacy for simplicity. He understood now. The gala hadn't been his moment to shine. It had been his trial. He was the one on the stand. And in the dark, curtained alcove, when he thought no one important was watching, he had given his own testimony. He had shown the world exactly who he was. Ilara and her father hadn't even been the jury. They were just the witnesses to his own self-inflicted verdict. He turned from his reflection, the monster from the sketch his only companion, and walked alone into the quiet, swallowing darkness. The story of Marcus Thorne is a brutal reminder that character isn't something you perform for a powerful audience. It's what you are when you think no one is looking. He had the world at his fingertips, but he forgot that true power isn't about how many people you can control, but how many you treat with respect, especially those you think are beneath you. He didn't just lose his wife and his job. He lost his own soul because he was blinded by ambition. What did you think of Marcus's downfall? Was it justice, or was it just a terrible miscalculation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, and you want more gripping tales of drama, consequence, and poetic justice, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a single update. Thanks for listening.